What's up guys, Chris Schwartz-Edmisten here from Schwartz-Edmisten Web Design. In today's video we're going to be looking at how to create fully custom index gallery layouts using CSS Grid. They are fully responsive, so you can have different layouts on tablet than you do on desktop, also custom, and then you can have them stack as they should on mobile. So again, we're going to be learning how to create really custom layouts using CSS Grid in Squarespace. So I had a Squarespace web designer reach out to me recently, and this is the index gallery layout that he had set up for his client in Squarespace. But the client got back to him and they said, actually we want a layout like this. Can you make that happen? So he reached out to me to hire me to help him achieve this layout. So I wanted to share the solution with you guys, and it's using CSS Grid. So I'm making this video just to show you guys what is possible inside of Squarespace, because it can be done. It can be done with CSS Grid. It just takes a little bit of CSS to get it set up. So that's what I want to share with you guys today. Alright, so to get started, this is just an example site. This isn't the actual client site. But I have my index gallery all set up already. I have my 6 images loaded in. I have some titles on some of them. And I'll jump into the site styles to show you guys how I have that set up, because this is important. You want the index gallery layout, the layout to be grid. And you only want one item per row because you want each index gallery item to take up the full 100% width of the screen. None of the other settings really matter that much. I have the aspect ratio all the way down to 30. You'll see why in a bit. It just keeps the images from getting too tall, because these are all pretty like wide aspect ratio images. And then I have just a little bit of spacing between each image as well, and I'm applying spacing on the sides and the top and the bottom. Okay, so now let's jump into the actual CSS, and I'll show you guys what we can do with CSS Grid. So the first thing that we have to do is we want to limit our CSS that we write just to this section. So this index gallery section ID is portfolio index. So I'm going to grab that ID, and we target IDs with a hashtag portfolio index, and then I'm going to open up some curly brackets, and now I'm going to write all my CSS within these curly brackets because I only want it to apply to this one index gallery section. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to first set the display to grid. So we'll actually be using CSS Grid. And then we're going to target each one of these items, and we're going to give them a unique, pretty much identifier, a unique name. It's called grid area in CSS Grid. And then we're going to map out where each of these items should lie in the grid. So let's just jump right in. It'll make more sense once we jump into it. So the first thing that I want to do, let's just go ahead and look at the HTML so I can show you guys what's actually going on. So actually, I'm going to delete that display grid because that's not even correct. Okay. All right, so we're in the HTML now. We're in this portfolio index. That's my index gallery section. If I toggle that down, we have an index gallery wrapper. And if I toggle that down, we have some gallery control buttons, which are actually hidden with display none because I'm not using them. So we have some index gallery controls which don't even matter, so just ignore those. This indicator is also hidden with display none, so just ignore that too. The only thing that we care about are all of these articles, which are these index gallery items. So as I hover over them, you can see each one of these index gallery items will be illuminated in the blue as I hover over each one. Cool. So the way that CSS Grid works is we can set on the parent container a display of grid, and then each of these children elements will turn into CSS Grid items basically. And when we give each one of these items a name, then we can align them to the grid that we specify. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to give each one of these items a unique name so that I can then later place it on the grid. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to target the first article. So we're going to target the articles with the nth of type selector. So basically within this parent container, I'm going to select the first element that has an element type of article. So that will be selecting this first one. So taking a step back, as I mentioned before, we have to give the parent container a display of grid. So I'm going to copy this parent container. Again, this contains all of the articles within it, so that makes this the parent container of all of these children. So I'm going to copy that class. We target classes with a period, and I'm going to set its display to grid. Okay, perfect. Now we can actually get to targeting each one of the articles. So again, to target the first article class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the element type of article, and I'm going to say nth of type, and then open up some parentheses, and I want to target the first article, and I'm going to give it a grid area name of big 1. So whoops, gotta spell it right. Okay, so let's go back to the email real quick. So the way that we have to set it up is as if it is a grid. So looking at this layout, we want one big item and then 2 smaller items up here, and then flip it on the bottom. We want 2 items here and then 1 big item here. But if we're going to split it up into a grid with columns and rows, we have to map out basically how many columns and how many rows we need. So let's think of each one of these little items as one column. So we have one column here, then we have another column here, and then this will be another column here and a 4th column there. So we need 4 columns because we have basically 4 items wide. And so then looking at the number of rows, so we have the height of these smaller articles, that would be 1 row here. Then we need a 2nd row in the middle there and a 3rd row at the bottom. So if we look at this as a grid, we're going to need 4 columns and 3 rows. So pretty much I'm going to give this first article a grid area name of big 1, and then the second article will be small 1, small 2, small 3, small 4, and then this last big article is going to be called big 2. So pretty straightforward on the names there, but again, I want this first article to be called big 1. So next, I just have to do this for every single article. So for the second article, that's going to be the first little one up here. I want it to be small 1. For the third article, I want it to be called small 2. For the 4th article, I want it to be called small 3. Then the 5th article is going to be small 4, and then the 6th article is going to be called big 2, and that's the 6th article. So a little shortcut to clean up my CSS because it's starting to get a little out of hand. Control A to select everything, and then Shift and then Tab at the same time to align everything correctly. Okay, so now we have everything named. Now we just have to map it out to the actual grid, because right now everything looks like crap. But this is the fun part. This is where we can actually tell each grid area how to align on the grid. Okay, so I'm going to come back up to this parent, the index gallery wrapper, and right under the display grid, I'm going to write grid template areas. So for this grid template areas, this is where we're actually going to like visually map out what the grid is going to look like. So I'm going to open up some quotation marks, and then I'm going to finish it off with a semicolon, and now we can start filling out the grid. So I'm just going to bring up the email again. So remember, we have 4 columns and 3 rows. So let's just focus on the first row right now. So I want big 1 to take up the first 2 columns. And then I want small 1 to take up the 3rd column, and I want small 2 to take up the 4th column. So we're just going to work our way row by row. So remember, big 1, I want to take up the 1st column. Then I'm going to space over, and I want big 1 to also take up the 2nd column. Then I want small 1 to take up the 3rd column, and I want small 2 to take up that 4th column. So now we can go down to the next row. I'm going to open up some more parentheses. So again, I want big 1 to take up that spot on the 2nd row. I want big 1 to take up that spot on the the first 2 columns on the 2nd row. Let's jump back to the email real quick. So right now we have big 1, small 2. Now we want big 1, big 1, big 2, big 2, because we're working on the 2nd row now. So big 1, then big 2, big 2. And now we're going to jump down to the last row. We're going to have those 2 underneath. So I'm going to want small 3 and small 4. And then I want big 2 and big 2. Okay, so now we have perfectly mapped out, because we have assigned names to each one of the gallery items, we can then just visually map out in our grid. So we have, you can see here, column 1, column 2, column 3, and column 4. And then we have row 1, row 2, and row 3. So it's really, really cool. CSS Grid is awesome because you can literally just draw like a visual map, and you get items to appear in really cool layouts, which is awesome. So right now the images are super small because I have the aspect ratio so tiny. So I'm going to go back to the site styles, and I'm going to crank up the aspect ratio a little bit, because right now it's just a little bit too small for my liking. Let's make these bad boys a little bit taller. Cool. All right, I'm going with 57. And there we have it. So now we have our galleries set up in accordance with how the client wanted, all using CSS Grid to align everything in really custom ways. So the cool thing about Grid is that not only can you decide the layout for desktop, but we can now basically redefine this grid template map for different screen sizes. So for example, I can write a media query at media screen and let's start with tablet. So max width 800 pixels, and I'm going to open up some curly brackets. So now I'm going to copy this grid template areas, and we can completely redefine the layout on tablet, because right now if we go down into tablet view, it's looking a little bit cramped for tablet view. I think it would be better if we had the the big image and then 2 smaller images going all the way across, and then if we had the next big image and then these 2 smaller images at the bottom. So I think that'll just be better for tablet, and we can totally do that. We just have to redefine our grid template areas. So I have the media query written. The next thing that we have to do is just redefine our layout. So if you think about it, if we're gonna stack, think of this as like 1 block that we're stacking and 2 blocks that we're stacking, we're only gonna need 2 columns. So I can just get rid of everything like that because again, we only need 2 columns. Whoops, I got rid of the quotation mark. Okay, so the first thing that we want to have is big one, going all the way across. The next, we would want small 1 and small 2 right under it. So we want small 1 and small 2. Next, we want the big image next. So let's do big 2, big 2. So now we have the big image there, and then, yep, we already have the small 3 and small 4 written. So now we've redefined our layout as having 2 columns and 4 rows, but we can totally change the order that everything is appearing in on tablet. So here is my full screen view, and then I can go down to tablet view, and this is a much better view for tablet because everything is fitting really well. But we still have a really cool layout for tablet. And then obviously for mobile, we probably don't want things side by side because, I mean, just looking at it, it's really squished and small. So what I can do is instead of having it be display grid, if we change it, the display for the parent container to block, then each one of these items is going to stack on top of each other and take up 100% of the width of the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this media query, and I'm going to change it to 640 pixels since that is the mobile breakpoint, and I'm just going to change the display to block and finish it off with a semicolon. So now we have this cool layout on desktop. Then when we go down to tablet, we have a cool stacked view. And then when we go all the way down to mobile, everything is stacking really well in a nice mobile responsive way. So that shows you how powerful CSS Grid is and how cool it is to use within Squarespace and rearrange items for different screen sizes. It makes it totally responsive. It's just really awesome. So I'm sorry if that was a little bit confusing. I strongly recommend that you look up some CSS Grid tutorials. This wasn't meant to be like a step-by-step follow along. It was more meant to be meant to show you guys just what is possible within Squarespace using CSS Grid. So the other cool thing is that we can play with this. Like, this is how I have the grid set up, but you can just, I mean, the possibilities are endless. So for example, let's have this big one. Let's have this one down here. This is small 4. Let's have it like span the full height of these 2 rows. So I'm going to change this to small 4 and this to small 4. So now you can see it's going like all the way up. And I mean, you can do anything. I'm not gonna get into all the different layouts that you can create, but I mean, you can see like this is a really custom layout here. Like everything, you would just never be able to create a layout like this within Squarespace, let alone have it be fully responsive once you get down to smaller screen sizes, and have everything stack appropriately depending on the screen size. So, alright guys, I hope you found this video pretty cool. If you need help customizing your Squarespace website, please contact me through my website. Link is in the description below. I would love to set up some really custom layouts like this for you guys. Alright guys, that is it for today. I will see you in the next one. In the meantime, keep creating awesome Squarespace websites.